Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mindful Marathon Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Quirk. I'm a pediatrician and a run coach and the founder of Mindful Marathon, where I help make running easy and fun for busy professionals. And today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Dr. Sarah Pospos. She completed her psychiatry residency as a chief resident at UCLA Kern. And as a sports psychiatrist and former student athlete, she is devoted to helping aspiring, current, and former athletes with depression, performance and general anxiety, insomnia, and other psychiatric challenges associated with injury, concussion, retirement from sport, overtraining, and others. So welcome to the show, Dr. Pospos. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions for you, but maybe tell us how you got into this field, maybe just a little bit of background before I ask you lots of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into psychiatry first, right, and then further specialized into sports psychiatry. In terms of sports psychiatry, I have to confess that I have my personal stakes in this. As you mentioned, I was a before back in the day, way back in the day, I was a former student athlete,
Okay.
and because of that, perhaps I just thought that this would be one way to gift in, to get to pay it forward, so to speak, for this groups, athletes, former athletes, current athletes, aspiring athletes. But also, what I noticed is there's a lot of unique challenges, perhaps, that an athletes may face. For example, things like performance anxiety, burning out from over exercising. Um, Having been trained to always tough it out, not paying attention too much of our mental side of things, just among the few. And I think it's really important to have someone that understands that both personally and professionally and can help the athletes with regards to that as well.
Yeah. Now, what was your sport, or did you have multiple?
I had multiple, but I wasn't good at it. It wasn't that good at it. So I played basketball, I played volleyball, and when I was smaller, I swim as well for a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Now, I know for me, on the regular, running is very much an antidepressant, anti-anxiety. It just does so much for my mental health and brings such joy and such happiness. And so I wonder if you could speak about that, and then also what happens, when we have to take time off from the sport, and we miss that, whatever it is, daily dose, 4 times weekly dose of running.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Great question. So totally great with what you said. It's antidepressant, anti-anxiety, running, as well as other aerobics, exercise, right, or exercise in general. So what I found is scientifically, it totally makes sense, right? We know that running, including aerobic exercise, is good for us physically, but also mentally. And a couple of reasons for that, if I may illustrate it as well. So
Yeah.
running and aerobic exercise, as well as exercise in general, has what we call biopsychosocial benefits. So biologically, as we probably know, among others, it increase some of the brain chemicals, neurotransmitters in our brain, and that way it boosts our mood, our energy, our concentration, awareness, lower our anxiety, and so forth. Also, it helps with the BDNF stimulation, brain-derived neurotropic factors, which essentially is like a miracle growth to our brain. So this BDNF would, on the longer term, um, help with our brain cells functions, brain connection, brain structure, and things of the likes. In terms of the psychological benefit, running as well as other exercise just adds that sense of mastery um, for for a lot of people, which in turn would help with their self-esteem, self-confidence, and things of the sorts. And then, of course, socially, it allows those social stimulation, interaction with others, running buddy perhaps, or running groups and whatnot, which could help prevent isolation that is very common in depression and anxiety and a lot of mental health challenges as well. So to answer your questions, I see all those benefits typically with runners or just with anyone who exercise or who is physically active as well in that regards. And it could be very, very beneficial as well.
Yeah. So I mean, we know physical activity and aerobic exercise is good for us, but you just illustrated like 100 different things. So thank you. The other thing I was thinking as you were talking about that and like the community aspect of it, I work with a lot of newer runners, and when I think back on my own journey, like when I started running, I got very quickly hooked on races. And I think that was part of it, like seeing the fruits of your labor in training and having this race as like a celebration of all of that, and then being in the community of runners. Yeah, it's quite, I mean, I don't know if I should use the word addictive, but
Mhm.
that's that's what it seemed like for me, and what it seems like when I work with a lot of newer runners. Like it's like you just do one, and then it's like all of a sudden they're signing up for lots more, and they tell me like, coach, you created a monster.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Now, okay, so now I guess we'll go on the other side of that. So running has, and aerobic exercise has all of these benefits, but then what happens when we have to take time off?
Yes.
I've seen a lot of athletes struggle when, yeah, either an injury or, yes, I work with a lot of young people who have concussions and things like that, and they have to take time off. What would you say, maybe some advice for those people right now who are on the sidelines?
Yes, definitely. It's very important issue for sure. So, first off, when we take time off, right, from especially from running, if you're a runner, a couple of things may happen. One, we lose, at least at that period, we lose that biopsychosocial benefits that we're talking about. So it could very much affect our mood, our energy, our concentration, our anxiety level in that way, directly or indirectly. The second thing is, as you mentioned, for a lot of us, who likes running, especially who are runners, um, running could be that one quote unquote coping mechanism for the day-to-day stress, right?
Mhm.
What's happening in our lives. It almost could serve as an escape, so to speak, for some, to escape just, the day-to-day grind, day-to-day stress, and other challenging situations, perhaps what's going on in our lives. So when we take that away, especially when we don't have any control about it, in the case of injury, perhaps having to take that time off unintentionally in with that regards,
Yeah.
could very much affect us in a more snowballed effect, so to speak, in this downward spiral in terms of how we can cope with our day-to-day stress and whatnot. And then the third component is because injury, especially concussion, is essentially out of our control, right? We don't know if and when we're gonna go back to the prior level. We don't know about the duration. We don't know how our recovery is gonna look like. Is there gonna be complication? Is it gonna be smooth? Almost everything, if not everything, is literally out of our control. And things that are out of our control usually could worsen anxiety, could be related to anxiety to a lot of us. So that just adds more
Mm.
complexity with that regards as well.
Yeah.
Having said that, in terms of the tips um, to deal with this very difficult situation, I think first and foremost is the mindset. It's easier said than done, but I found that reframing expectation helps a lot. Again, just try to remind ourselves that a lot of these things are out of our control, and therefore having a rigid expectation may just add an added pressure, additional pressure to ourselves, and would not be helpful, both in terms of how we feel as well as down the road, perhaps our physical recovery as well.
Yeah. I think, I'm thinking back on an injury I had, like probably the first time that I really had to take off a couple of months from running. And the injury wasn't even related to running, which almost made me even a little bit angrier about the whole thing. Like it was a simple, trip and twist the ankle in my garden, and I had to take time off, and that was really very difficult for me. And I found myself thinking that even though I took off a month or two, when I got back to running, it would be as if I would be starting from the beginning, that somehow the last 5 or 6 years of training would have been erased because I took off 2 months. And that's a little bit of like all or none thinking, a little bit of black and white thinking there. And it's obviously not true, but I definitely learned some mindset techniques back then that have helped, in subsequent encounters when I've had to take time off from the sport. But it can be really difficult in the moment, for sure.
Definitely.
Do you have recommendations, like not to say replace your sport with something else, but ideas on what people could do to sort of replace that time while they're recovering?
Absolutely. Great question. So I think it also relates to the concept of self-identity, right? Just to preface my answer. So the more we associated our identity, in this case, for example, for the athletes, the more we associate our identity with being a runner or with running, when it get quote unquote taken away from us, especially if it's unintentionally, like in the case of injury, it could really do more damage to our self identity, perhaps our self esteem, and of course, like we talked about it earlier, our day to day in terms of how to cope with just what's going on in our life. So my tips would be twofold. One, if you still, in any way be involved with running. So, for example, coaching. In the meantime, just trying to read more resources to elevate your running, perhaps running techniques or things of the likes while quote unquote waiting for that recovery. It may be helpful in a sense that it still connects you to running, which is your passion. But be mindful that for some people, this may increase, the frustration, right? Because, sometimes we just want to be there in the action and not just be on the sidelines, quote unquote. The other alternative that I may recommend is having other coping skills or other go-to skills, or maybe not go-to skills, like go-to strategies, so to speak, in our toolbox to deal with the stress or just with the day-to-day challenges. So for example, this may be a good time to explore other hobbies, things that you may be interested in the past, but just never have the time to, explore. Any sort of other physical movement that wouldn't compromise the injury could still be beneficial. Other hobbies, music, arts, or things like that, if that's what you're into. And then that way, if you have several of those in addition to running, you could always pick and choose. This would be in your toolbox in terms of coping. And then you have more alternatives, more options if situations like this happen.
Yeah, I love that idea of having a toolbox and working on these strategies before all of this happens, so that you've got it just in case in the back pocket.
In the back pocket, definitely.
Yeah. Now, to switch gears just a little bit, before we were touching on the topic of performance anxiety, and I was wondering if you could speak to that and maybe any tips you have. I know that's a common issue for a lot of athletes and a lot of runners, especially if they've been, training, devoting quite a lot of time to training for an important race. I have clients who are hoping to qualify for the Boston Marathon, and it can be very stressful, especially the week prior to a race, the night before a race, and even at the start line of a race. So if you could speak a little bit about performance anxiety and some tips you have for us on ways we can manage that, that would be really helpful, I know.
Yes, absolutely. So performance anxiety, right? It happens a lot in sports. And it's somewhat similar in terms of big concept to things like test anxiety, for example, exam anxiety, uh, anxiety when having to do public speaking, when we feel that the stake is high, especially in this case, right?
Yeah.
And we have to perform, like you mentioned, we put a lot of pressure in ourselves, or perhaps in addition to what others, the pressures that others put in ourselves as well.
Mhm.
So some tips with regard to that, just as a background first, anxiety back in the day is, if I could oversimplify it, is one way of our brain to tell us about a threat to our survival. So let's say in the hunting days, if we encounter a bear, our brain would tell us, hey, this is a threat. Go run away, right? That's when the fight or flight or freeze system, the sympathetic system, kicks in. And as a result, not only that, responses such as our heart start to race, our respiration start to increase the rate, our muscles start to get tense, but also in our brain, the focus switch between the part of our brain that allows clearer thinking, the prefrontal cortex, to the more fear related, more primitive, so to speak, area of our brain, the amygdala, as an example, which is why it's very, very hard to think logically and objectively, especially in the middle of anxiety attacks or acute anxiety.
Mhm.
So, having said that, a couple of things may be helpful for performance anxiety. Um, some practical things include deep breathing, deep intentional breathing, which basically just means breathing with our belly, our diaphragm. I like to count to six while inhaling, count to six while pausing, and then count to six while exhaling, and repeat it a couple of times. And what it does, is it switch that focus from the sympathetic, the fight or flight or freeze system, to the opposite.
Mhm.
And as a result, it makes us more calmer, both in terms of our thinking as well as our physical reactions in our body. The second tip would be to incorporate mindfulness. So, what I like to do in that case is, while I'm doing my deep breathing, I just focus on several body sensations, right? At the moment. So, for instance, how the air feels against my nostril when I take a deep breath, how my diaphragm, my chest expand and return to its original position, how my thighs, if you're sitting, how my thighs feel against the chair, or if you're standing, how my feet feels against the floor. And while doing that, I incorporate the mindfulness component, which one would reground me. So instead, switch the focus, so to speak, from that overwhelmed, decluttered, anxious mindset in our brain to a physical sensation, right? What's going on at the moment, how our body feels. That's one part. And the second part of mindfulness, it is down the road. It could also help with that BDNF, that miracle growth to our brain factor in the longer run, which would help as well in terms of being more calm. The third advice would be visualization.
Mm.
So if performance anxiety happens to you, it perhaps help to visualize the big day, right? The big game, the marathon day, the big performance, so to speak, beforehand.
Mhm.
And then just go through scene by scene. If you can, imagine what may go wrong and how you can troubleshoot it, and just do this day in and day out. And what it does, it lessen anxiety, because among many reasons, it would add that sense of control to what's
Mm.
going to happen. And it would just help with our brain connection in terms of the nerve connection, brain cells connection, to prepare, just the way our muscle is preparing, similarly, to oversimplify it, um, for that particular function, for that particular performance in the big day.
Yeah. Oh, wow. These are great pieces of advice. This is like mental training and mental fitness, in addition to the physical fitness, but so good. As I knew it would be. Okay. Well, I think, oh, wait, I'm going to cut that out, but we should, I guess, wrap up a little bit. Well, Dr. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing just a little bit about what you do. I feel like we should maybe do a part two. But in the meantime, can you tell everyone where to find you?
Yes, of course. And thank you so much, Dr. Michelle, for having me as well. So if you're interested in more tips like this, you can always find me on my website, lifestyletelepsychiatry.com, or on Instagram with the same handle, lifestyletelepsychiatry.com. For some of us, what we talked about today may be helpful, but if you need that extra push in terms of elevating your mental wellness, mental fitness, with regards to the challenges as an athlete or mental health in general, and you happen to be in California, you could also book an appointment with me virtually at my website, lifestyletelepsychiatry.com.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much. This has been super helpful. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. If you liked it, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And if you are a newer runner or a runner who hasn't run in a while and you're looking to get back into the sport, you can find out how to work with me over on my website, which is mindful-marathon.com. See you on the next episode.